Welcome to the Political Checkmates, and I am back. Sorry I have not been making many videos for a while. I was busy with some personal stuff, but I will be returning to make more videos in later October. But today, I am going to checkmate Kamala Harris's economic policies through Kyle Kulinski's coverage of it. Today, I will checkmate Kyle Kulinski's video, Kamala Shocks Kyle with Based Policy Agenda. So now then, let us begin.
The way, let's go ahead and dive into it. So, Kamala Harris just unveiled her economic policy agenda. Okay. And here I have an amalgamation of the different policies. What was kind of annoying about this is that there were a bunch of articles written on it. And for whatever reason, one article would leave out like two or three policies, and another article would leave out like two or three different policies. And it's like, I'm looking for the stuff that she released. Why would you not give me the entire thing she released? It's very weird. It's very like lazy on the part of all the different news outlets that, ran articles on this. It's like, give me all of them in one place. This isn't that much to ask for. So anyway, believe it or not, after reading all the articles, this summation right here is probably the best summation I could find. It was from one of the Krasenstein bros, hilariously. But so here's what she proposed. First of all, a $25,000 subsidy for first-time home buyers. That's a federal subsidy of $25,000 for more than 1 million first-time home buyers to assist with down payments. Now, she also says she wants to increase the supply. She wants to build 3 million more homes. So she's sort of attacking the housing affordability crisis from both ends. Also, $6,000 child tax credit, a $6,000 child tax credit for the first year of a baby's life, in addition to restoring the Biden administration's child tax credit that expired in 2021, which provided $3,000 per child, up from $2,000.
First off, I find that increasing the housing supply is a good idea for lowering the cost of housing. I am skeptical on how Kamala Harris will do it, since many regulations that restrict the housing supply are local and state level. Don't get me wrong, regulations do increase the cost of housing, according to this study from the National Bureau of Economic Research. While with the $25,000 subsidy for homes, I find that it would be a problem because there is a reason why down payments are required when buying a home, so it could help reduce people who default on their loans. So with the $25,000 subsidy, it will allow people who are not able to pay off the loan to get a home where they would default on a mortgage, causing something similar to the 2008 housing crisis, which historian Tom Woods documents in his book The Meltdown, and argues that was one of the causes being lower standards for borrowers. While with the child tax credit, the economists Bruce Mayer and Kevin Corrithan argue that simply with the $3,600 child tax credit would cost more than $100 billion, which is more than we spend on non-medical mean testing programs, food stamps, and earned income tax credit. It would cause 1.5 million workers to exit the workforce, while child poverty would cause 22 or less % decline in deep child poverty and would not fall at all.
Political hack. All right, more. Elimination of medical debt. Oh, inject it right into my veins. Proposing to cancel medical debt for millions of Americans by using federal funds to buy and forgive outstanding medical debt from healthcare providers. Guys, this is a big one. This is a big one because we've now seen a number of Democratic governors actually do this. I know in Connecticut, I think Ned Lamont is his name, he did it. We had Josh Shapiro actually did some of this in Pennsylvania. There's a few other states as well where they did it. And what you do is you literally buy up for pennies on the dollar medical debt held by the people of your state, and then you just wipe it out. Okay, in my wildest imagination 10 years ago, I never would have thought the Democrats would have gone to this length to do something this good, because this is an absolute game changer for people. Something like 40% of the US population has medical debt. Medical bills are the number one cause of bankruptcy in this country. And so to say, well, look, we'll buy up the debt for pennies on the dollar and wipe it out, that is so big. Now, of course, look, you need other systemic reforms to make it so that, fast forward 10 years, 20 years, we don't have the same number of people with medical debt, right? So you have to address the core problem. But suffice to say that this right here is a real solution. It's right up there with like wiping out student loan debt, for example. It's a way to just make life easier for so many people who are struggling with something that they shouldn't have to struggle with. So I love this idea of a.
So with medical debt relief, it won't really have much of an impact on a person because this study from the National Bureau of Economic Research looked at 83,401 people from 2018 to 2020 who had their medical debt relief and found it had no impact on credit access and had no effect on mental health. The possible reasons could be because these people have other forms of debt they owe, and also the negative emotional attachment of getting handouts comes into play. While with medical debt being the number one cause of bankruptcy, it isn't, according to this study from PubMed, which, according to the paper from 2014's report from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, about 20% of Americans have substantial medical debt, yet in a given year, less than 1% of Americans file for personal bankruptcy, suggesting that this subject is problematic. Clearly, many people face medical debt but do not go bankrupt. Of course, our healthcare system does have a lot of flaws that need to be fixed. I'm personally in favor for starters doing the Hans Hermann Hoppe four-step healthcare solution, while with college debt, I'm more in favor of doing income share agreements, and here's a wonderful video from John Sussel explaining it.
Medical debt. All right, more. Ban on price gouging for groceries and food. Introducing the first ever ban on price gouging for groceries and food, including authorizing the Federal Trade Commission to impose fines on grocery stores that engage in excessive price hikes. Now, as I'm sure you can imagine, this one right here is viewed as the most controversial, the one that the right is honing in on the most, and their arguments are utter trash. So first of all, they changed the language. They're not saying, oh, it's a ban on price gouging. They're not accurately describing what she describes it as. What they say is, you're doing price controls, full stop. You're doing price controls, and that's like communism. That's like the Soviet Union. That's going to lead to all these unintended consequences, and those consequences are horrible, et cetera, et cetera. By the way, it was just last week that they're out there, inflation is the biggest problem hurting the American people. The prices of common goods have gone up and up and up and up and up. They say that last week. This week, she proposes something to actually fix that, and they're like, no, not like that. Well, which is it? Which is it? The reality is, I think they know that this plan is an effective plan to lower the prices for the everyday goods for the American people, and they don't like that. So that's why they say they totally flip on it and do a 180 and say, oh, it's socialism, communism, extremism, radicalism. And so, of course, it's damned if you do, damned if you don't with these people. If she didn't propose this, they would have said, you're not doing anything to address the inflation. If she does this, they go, you are a communist. So there is no winning. This is just political hackery coming from the right. Now, by the way, let me give you this very important fact, which you need to know. There are over 30 states in this country that already have anti-price gouging laws. In fact, I think the number is 39 states. Now, in some states, it's just civil penalties. In some states, it's criminal penalties. In some states, it's both. There's a very few states that don't have any laws vis-a-vis price gouging, but you already have these laws that exist on the books at the state level. More than half the states, over 30 states in this country, have anti-price gouging laws. Nobody's ever looked at that state of affairs, turned around and said, oh, those 39 states are all communist. No, nobody ever said that. Because everybody understands it's a reasonable thing to propose. Guys, if there's a natural disaster, let's say a hurricane wipes out a whole area, right? Should the one store that didn't get destroyed, that still has goods, should they have the right to say, now I'm going to take all my goods and jack them up 400%? And, 95% of people who come in the door are not going to be able to afford the things anymore? No, the federal government has an interest in stepping in that instance and saying, sorry, you can't do that. Now, you could counter argue and say, look, this is just supply and demand. And it's like, okay, but supply and demand is not bestowed by God. It's not like, oh, we can never tweak supply and demand ever. Of course you can. We tweak the market all the fucking time. We do it out of necessity, right? So in this instance, is it unreasonable for a store to say we're going to jack up our prices 150% because we can in this? Of course it is. Of course it is. Now, look, for the states, it exists in the context of if there's like a natural disaster, then they have anti-price gouging laws. This idea is just taking it one step further. Hey, let's make sure you just can't do price gouging, period, right? That's not to say you can never raise your prices. That's not to say we don't default more often than not to supply and demand. It's just saying in the extremes, well, let's intervene. Guys, it's a common sense. It's a phenomenal policy. It's a great policy. And the fact that the right is melting down leads me to believe they know it's a great policy, and so they want to try to snuff it out in the crib, and the way to do that is to just scream communism. All right, more. Cap on.
I am going to read this response from the economist Brian Alberich on why it is fair to call her plans as price controls. Harris's campaign has been vague on details, but any attempt to ban price gouging on groceries would essentially amount to price controls. Some might argue that calling Harris's proposal price controls is unfair or hyperbolic. After all, she's not directly saying prices right. But let's be clear, any policy that gives the government the power to decide what price increases are fair or unfair is effectively a price control system. It doesn't matter if you call it anti-gouging or fair pricing or consumer protection. The effect is the same. When bureaucrats, not markets, determine acceptable prices, we're dealing with price controls. Here's why. Number 1. Vague definitions leading to broad interpretations. Without a clear, objective definition of price gouging, the regulators would have a wide latitude to decide what constitutes an unfair price increase. It's typically reversed to unfair high prices during emergencies. This isn't about emergencies. This ambiguity could easily lead to de facto price controls across a wide range of grocery items. Number 2. Enforcement requires price monitoring. To enforce a price gouging ban, the government would need to monitor price changes. This creates a system where prices are effectively controlled by bureaucrats rather than market forces. Number 3. Companies will err on the side of caution, faced with potential penalties for gouging. Grocery retailers and suppliers are likely to be overly cautious about any price increases, even when justified by rising costs or changes in supply and demand. This chilling effect is tantamount to informal price controls. Of course, the action of price controls are bad because in this book, The 40 Centuries of Wage and Price Controls, How Not to Fight Inflation, looked at multiple events in history and found that they are failures because they cause things like starvation, shortages, and government overreach. Also, a person can find inflation to be a concern, but find the proposed solution would be worse, like a clogged toilet being an issue, but a proposed solution like burning the house down to be worse. While with price gouging laws, the majority of economists reject anti-price gouging laws. This poll from UChicago finds that nearly 80% of economists reject them. This article from Harvard Business Review points out that price gouging laws encourages people to hoard material and discourages people from bringing more supplies. If you want to learn more, I recommend this podcast interview with Tom Woods and economist David Henderson. They point out the benefits of price gouging. Also, ignoring basic laws like supply and demand would be as bad as not following any other field's laws like computer science. When ignoring them would backfire. I am now going to critique 3 more proposals just to save time on editing, and then 2 more video clips in the video to respond to. The first policy proposal being caps on medicine prices. I find that caps on medicine costs would lower medical innovation because cutting prices by 40 to 50% in the USA would cause 30 to 60% fewer R&D projects. After all, in 2019, Canada implemented price controls and it caused a 40% decline in new drugs launched in Canada. While the second policy proposal is to increase the earned income tax credit, my response is that the program from 2016 to 2020 had a fraud rate of about 24%, which is $16 billion a year. The earned income tax credit is somewhat of a poverty trap, where if people try to increase their hours or try to advance their jobs through career progression, they face a decline in welfare payments and a higher tax burden trap them into poverty, and multiple studies agree with this. While with paid family leave, it would cause businesses to hire less women because they would be riskier to hire because of the additional cost of providing paid family leave. This study from the American Economic Association found that paid family leave in California reduced employment and earnings roughly a decade after they gave birth for first-time mothers.
We will do that together. And we will make sure those homes actually go to working and middle-class Americans, not just investors. Because, some corporate landlords, some of them, buy dozens, if not hundreds of houses and apartments. Then they turn them around and rent them out at extremely high prices. And it can make it impossible then for regular people to be able to buy or even rent a home. Some corporate landlords collude with each other to set artificially high rental prices, often using algorithms in price-fixing software to do it. It's anti-competitive and it drives up costs. I will fight for a law.
Okay, I would recommend watching this video from Kirk Wilcox, video debugging the claim that corporate landlords are the cause for the housing crisis. Now with the software algorithm claim, I believe she is citing RealPage. My response would be that RealPage has been used around 30% of rental units in metro areas, and nationally less than 10%. So the majority of landlords don't use RealPage, so it does not have much market power over the economy. I honestly think that landlords use rent accommodation algorithms to be responsive to changes in market prices, which would cause it to increase or decrease rents. That is what this study from UPenn found.
Are seeing their highest profits in 2 decades. And while many grocery chains pass along these savings, others still aren't. Look, I know most businesses are creating jobs, contributing to our economy, and playing by the rules. But some are not. And that's just not right. And we need to take action when that is the case.
So what she's referring to, idiots like the editorial board over at the Wall Street Journal, they say it's a conspiracy theory. They say it's not true. She's referring to, again, this thing called greedflation. That, hey, the reason why we still have inflation is not because of any fundamental problem with the economy, right? It's not because the supply chain anymore. The supply chains are fixed post-COVID. So what's leading to it? What's leading to it is corporate greed, where they feel like we could just get away with charging higher prices because we used the inflation panic to say, we have no choice but to raise our prices. Meanwhile, they have these colossal margins on the things that they're selling. And in fact, Matt Stoller had a piece. This was early on in the process, but at the time, 60% of inflation was due to simply corporate greed. They were charging higher prices because they felt like they could get away with it. That's what she's referring to here. Trump has no plan to deal with that. She actually is laying out a plan to deal with that. Large grocers took advantage of pandemic supply chain disruptions, FTC finds. A report found that large firms pressured suppliers to favor them over competitors. It also concluded that some retailers seem to have used rising costs as an opportunity to further hike prices. This was from the New York Times. Look at this. Notable food companies with massive net income increases over the past year. Cal-Maine Foods up 718%. Kraft Heinz up 448%.
Many studies have rejected the view that inflation is caused by greed. This study from the American Economic Association found that companies doing the most price raising were more likely to be the companies getting fatter profit margins. Another explanation for the markups, according to this Kansas City Federal Reserve paper, is that businesses raise prices to help offset future costs. And the same study found that corporate profits contributed a lot in 2021, but little in 2022. This study from the Federal Reserve Board found that when you account for fiscal and monetary intervention in the economy, corporate profit margins followed pre-COVID trends, while this study from the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco found that aggregate markups, which are more relevant for overall inflation, have generally remained flat, and the markups fluctuations have not been the main driver of inflation. Now, with the FTC report that Kyle cited, economist Fred Ashton responded to the FTC report by pointing out that it did not test whether the specific companies increased their prices by more or less than their input costs increases. Also, people with the stimulus checks are unable to dine out and instead went to grocery stores to buy food. That could be why the businesses increase profits. I would recommend reading this article for more information. While with businesses like Cal-Maine, Kraft Heinz, Congra brands, if we look at macro trends of their net income, which helps put the data into context, these bigger numbers don't seem all that big because businesses like Cal-Maine's biggest profits were in 2023 but declined in 2024, while Kraft Heinz's biggest profits were in 2018, and Conquer Brands looks pretty similar to previous years. If you want to learn more about inflation and corporate greed theory besides my channel, you should watch a friend to the channel, Double T. We are working together to debunk misinformation about inflation. While on the Trump policies, I would recommend this video from Mentis Wave on his assessment. I agree with most of what Mentis Wave's evaluation on policies like economics. While on who I would vote for, I honestly am not going to vote because neither candidate really represents my values, like Ron Paul or Javier Milei. And so this is the end of the video. Thank you for watching, and please donate my Patreon so I can make more videos. And have a nice day.